All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Look, if you glance at the news on literally any given day, it feels like the world is a machine running at absolute maximum speed, doesn't it? We're seeing crazy, rapid technological disruptions, huge geopolitical shifts, and just an endless stream of breaking alerts. But what if all that movement is just an illusion? Today we're exploring a seriously fascinating text by Dr. Atique Ur Rehman. He proposes this striking paradox. Despite all this frenetic activity, the world is actually, structurally, locked right in place. So we're going to unpack exactly why the gears of this global machine are completely jammed and why, ironically, the faster we run, well, the more stuck we become.
Dr. Rehman makes this absolutely crucial distinction between two concepts we usually just mix up: motion and movement. Motion? Well, that's the noise. It's the summits being called, the climate agreements being signed, militaries mobilizing, and the constant tech disruption. But movement? Movement is actual, forward-moving progress. It's the permanent resolution of issues. And the author's core thesis here is that our current global system is completely trapped. We have an absolute abundance of motion, but virtually zero real movement. It's like we're caught in this massive gravitational field of conflict that just pulls every single attempt at a real resolution right back to the starting line. So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll be looking at the paradox of motion, structural blockers, the multipolarity trap, suspended conflicts, the AI uncertainty cascade, and finally, finding agency.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the paradox of motion, or going nowhere fast.
Now, it's really important to understand that we aren't sitting at some optimistic end of history, and we're not just seeing a simplistic clash of civilizations either. Instead, what we're experiencing is dynamic stagnation. Dr. Rehman defines this as a world system that's in constant motion, yet producing zero net progress. It is literally locked in place by its own structural contradictions. Just think about things like weaponized economic connectivity, or that chaotic shift we're seeing from fossil fuels to critical minerals like lithium. These aren't straight lines of progress. They are deeply tangled, nonlinear trajectories. And they tangle together so tightly that they actually remove the temporal space, the literal time and breathing room that nations desperately need to negotiate and actually move forward.
Moving right along to Section 2, structural blockers. Let's look at why nothing actually moves.
So, what exactly are these massive jammed gears in our machine? Well, the author points out that major powers have these deeply embedded geopolitical rigidities, basically domestic commitments that completely strip away their strategic flexibility on the world stage. The text highlights the Middle East as the prime example of this cascade effect. So let's neutrally walk through this sequence, purely following the author's structural argument. Step 1. The U.S. has a domestic, almost constitutional-level political commitment to Israel. That makes its stance largely non-negotiable, no matter who's in office. Step 2. Because of that rigidity, the U.S. simply cannot credibly offer Iran the security assurances it needs for regional balance, which completely forecloses broad diplomatic pathways. Step 3. Iran recognizes this and acts rationally within what it sees as a totally irrational system, by arming proxies and sustaining asymmetric forces out of pure necessity. And Step 4, the result is the U.S. becomes structurally consumed by a region it simply cannot stabilize. It drains its focus and resources right away from its primary strategic competition with China. And look, this is just one example of how domestic architecture creates a massive global blockage. Pretty much every major actor has these kinds of hampering commitments.
Which brings us to Section 3, the multipolarity trap and endemic uncertainty.
For a long time, we were told a multi-power world would distribute power and make everything safer. But today, the global board is incredibly chaotic. It's complicated by multiple major power nodes: the US, China, Russia, India, the EU, plus regional powers like Turkey or Saudi Arabia. Think back to the Cold War. Despite the immense danger, there were rigid but predictable rules, right? Superpowers understood escalation thresholds. Today, with so many major actors playing, there's basically no rulebook. So nations like Pakistan, for instance, are forced to constantly calculate and hedge their bets across multiple dimensions, with all these different actors. It creates what the author so perfectly calls a system of managed incoherence.
So the really crucial point here is how nations actually react to this trap. Without a rulebook, actors make decisions that are individually completely rational, but they produce collectively irrational and fragile outcomes. They pursue nuclear deterrence. They hedge their bets with multiple, totally conflicting partners. They build alternative global institutions like BRICS, and they invest heavily in asymmetric weapons like cyber warfare and drones. They're just trying to survive in an environment of endemic uncertainty. But by doing all of this simultaneously, they're actually making the entire global system infinitely more brittle.
Next up is Section 4, suspended conflicts, the literal bombs in the basement.
Now, what does this actually look like in practice? It's the heavy, draining reality of what Dr. Rehman calls suspended conflicts. We're talking about foundational disputes that the world has basically just given up on solving, opting instead to indefinitely postpone them. And honestly, the data is pretty sobering. Take Kashmir, suspended for over 73 years by mutual nuclear deterrence. Palestine, 75+ years, locked right in place by a military imbalance and total international paralysis. Syria, a 13-year frozen proxy nightmare. Ukraine, ongoing, suspended by a mutual inability to deliver a decisive knockout blow to end the war. The author's point here is absolutely vital. These are not isolated little problems simply waiting for a neat peace treaty. They have become structural features of the global system itself. The whole world order is actively optimized for indefinite suspension rather than actual resolution.
And the cost of this suspension? It is staggering. Keeping these conflicts in the freezer just consumes vital resources that could be used for human development. It actively creates deep-seated domestic constituencies, like massive defense industries or specific political factions that literally become dependent on perpetuating the conflict. It generates these compounding generational grievances, and it totally blocks any sort of regional economic integration. By consciously choosing not to solve these issues, the world is actively blocking its own progress.
All right, Section 5, the AI Uncertainty Cascade, the ultimate accelerant.
Now, you might be thinking of AI as just a tech issue, right? But the author frames it as a massive uncertainty amplifier. See, traditional geopolitics relies on bounded predictability. You know roughly how many tanks your enemy has. But AI, it removes that predictability entirely. Algorithms optimize in these wild, nonlinear ways that we just can't foresee. Complex AI systems interact with each other to trigger totally unexpected cascading crises in finance or defense. Deepfakes absolutely destroy our ability to verify basic truth. I mean, how do you even negotiate a peace treaty if you can't prove a video of an attack is real? And perhaps most chillingly, autonomous systems remove the human hesitation point. A drone swarm doesn't feel moral friction, it just executes. It completely closes the window for diplomacy before humans even realize a conflict has started.
And this leads us straight into a pretty terrifying loop. Because AI makes the future fundamentally unknowable, global actors respond in literally the only way they know how. They accelerate. They speed up military buildups. They intensify tech decoupling. They rapidly increase surveillance. The logic is, if you don't know what's coming, you frantically hoard power right now. But here's the catch. A system optimizing for sheer speed and control becomes incredibly brittle. It pretty much guarantees that when assumptions inevitably fail, the system won't just bend, it will break catastrophically.
Finally, let's look at Section 6, Finding Agency in Stagnation. Where do we actually go from here?
So, where does human agency actually exist in this giant locked machine? Well, Dr. Rehman is very honest here. The paths forward are extremely narrow. He outlines these moves within the standstill. Now, to be clear, they aren't escape routes, but rather ways to carve out just a tiny bit of space. For instance, we can engage in second-order moves, acting as conscious mediators rather than just picking sides. We can pursue institutional innovation, building actual alternatives to paralyzed zombie organizations like the UN. We can make the hard technological choice to actually constrain things like autonomous weapons, prioritizing long-term stability over a quick short-term advantage. We can work on reframing narratives way beyond zero-sum games, and we can practice temporal extension, basically deliberately forcing a slowdown in decision-making to allow diplomacy a fighting chance to breathe against the intense rush of AI.
But all of that brings us to the author's ultimate, deeply provocative question. Does the system actually have the capacity to move? The text argues that because these structural blockades are just so deeply embedded in state identities and institutions, genuine resolution is highly unlikely without some major, potentially painful shifts. I'm talking about a total transformation of domestic politics, or a massive external shock that basically forces renegotiation, or just incredibly difficult, deliberate institutional redesign.
I want to leave you with this final powerful thought from Dr. Rehman. Until the locks break, or are deliberately released, we will continue to mistake motion for progress. This explainer really challenges us to look past all those breaking news alerts and the endless stream of summits. The machine is running so hot, but it is literally bolted to the floor. Escaping dynamic stagnation isn't about running faster. It's about realizing that sometimes accepting winning less and making strategic concessions might actually be our only real path to security. What do you think it will take to finally break those locks? Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating perspective today. Stay curious, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.